Hey gang, what's happening? This is Brady from Monkey Edge, checking in from Shreve, Ohio at the home of Hinderer Knives. And I'm sitting here obviously with the man himself, Rick Hinderer. First, Rick, thanks for having me out and giving me kind of the behind the scenes tour, showing me how the sausages are made, so to speak. And really wanted to take this time and sit down with Rick. A lot of, obviously, as your business has grown and changed over the years, you know, more people have come into the Hinderer Knives fold, but might not be aware that you've been in this game for a long time. I mean, you know, the Hinderer Knives started a lot longer than the XM18, right? Why don't you tell me kind of what?
Well, I've been a custom knife maker in the business for 25 years. 2012 is going to be my 25th year, and I started out. Probably how a lot of makers have started out, the love of knives. I've always loved knives ever since I was a kid, and I was a horseshoer or farrier, and I also trained horses. That's where the horse head logo comes from. So one day I got bored turning horseshoes, forging horseshoes. So I had a friend of mine who was retiring from the military, and I wanted to get him a knife, a special knife for his retirement. And I didn't have enough money to buy anything back then, so I thought, well, hey, I'll forge a knife. You know, I'll make a knife for him. And so I forged a knife out of a plow point.
Wow, really?
Yeah, out of a plow point, and it was a Tano, and I just cord wrapped the handle and gave it to him. That was my first knife, and I thought, wow, this is cool. Right. And so from there I just started. I didn't, you know, back then, this was in what, 86, 87, I didn't know, you know, we didn't have the internet, so it's not like I didn't know custom knives. I didn't know people actually did this. Yeah,
you were just like a guy and said, I make knives.
Yeah.
Right? You know, normally, so you were actually forging the horseshoes, right?
Yeah.
So it's just like, hey, well, instead of a horseshoe, I'm going to make a sharp
a knife, yeah. And so I went to a gun show then, and I seen my first knife maker. Right. His name's Tom Downing. He's actually still making knives. He's a stock removal maker. And I was just blown away. I'm like, wow, this is, you know, people do make these, not just factories. And so he kind of gave me a little instruction at first, and it was pretty much self-taught. I just, especially the forging, I really, you know, it's try something. Well, that didn't work. Throw it away. And get another piece of steel.
They were in an afternoon. So
get another piece of steel and keep going. And that's pretty much how I got my start. It was a lot of my horseshoeing customers were my first knife customers.
Right.
So when I'd go out and shoot their horses or trim their horses or whatever, I'd show them my hobby, you know, hey, check out what I made.
This corner of the shop, right?
Yeah, you know, and they'd be like, wow, that's really cool, you know, and they would buy it, you know, and I would sell like a skinning knife or a hunting knife for 25, 30 bucks.
Breaking it in.
You know,
you know what? You make 100 of those, you can make real money.
Yeah. Yeah. But I took that money and I bought more handle material, and it's just a progression thing
from there.
So that was my start.
So you started off in the forging world, right? Yes. Basically. So
basically.
And in terms of, so did you, you know, like you said, there wasn't the internet back then, so all that metallurgy and, you know, and the forging process, you were obviously familiar with from the horseshoe side.
From the horseshoe,
you know, so you kind of took that knowledge and adapted it, or where did you, you know?
Actually, the timeline over the 25 years, I started out forging.
Right.
I wasn't in the forging very long because the guy that I mentioned before, Tom Downing, he was stock removal. So I went to the stock removal side because that's where I was learning from.
Right.
And so my first venture to a gun show, my official, you know, I am a knife maker, I'm going to sell my wares, those were stock removal knives.
Right. You know what, let me sorry to interrupt you, I just wanted to back up because again, we have a lot of newer customers to not only Hinderer, but maybe even new to custom knives. maybe just give the real quick layman's definition, you know, between stock removal and versus forging, because some guys, we kind of take that for granted when we're talking, but, you know, some of the guys out there might not be as familiar.
The kind of my definition, I think it probably follows a lot of other makers, the stock removal versus the forging. I kind of tell people in a nutshell, forging is you take a piece of steel and you pound it and you mold it into a knife. Right. You're mashing the steel out to form the the shape of the blade, and it's kind of like taking a piece of clay and molding it. Stock removal, you're cutting away everything from a bar of steel that doesn't look like a knife. Right. So you're cutting it, you're grinding it into the shape, and then the edge bevels, you're grinding the edge bevels instead of forging the edge bevels. So that's kind of the difference. And there's still a certain amount of stock removal that goes on a forged piece. Yeah, absolutely. You still have to run a grinder. Yeah. Then you're grinding it and getting the final. All that stuff. So sorry to interrupt there. I went from very quickly. I forged my first few knives, and then I started doing the stock removal because that's what I was learning. Right. And I did that for a while, and other makers are telling me, you have a background in blacksmithing. You need to get back into forging. And I met up with a very famous bladesmith named Hugh Bartram. And Hugh did unbelievable art knives. And so I got hooked up with him, and that's when I learned about Damascus. And I was like, oh, this is the magical steel. Yeah, the whole other world opened up. Yeah. And so I pretty much, I got my forge, and Hugh kind of, told me about, how to keep the fire clean, and about, how to do forge welding and stuff like that. And so I got into Damascus making. And for many years, that's all I made was Damascus. All the knives that I made were Damascus. Very seldom did I produce homogeneous steel knives. Because you were into forging your own stuff. Yeah. Forging mine. I started forging a lot of sand mine Damascus, and that kind of became my trademark, so to speak, was sand mine. It was nickel, pure nickel is what I use in almost all of my Damascus to get really wild patterns and the look, and that's what I did for many years. And got more into the knife, and maybe into the art knife realm. Maybe also break down the definition of sand mine Damascus versus some of the other types that when people are normally sand mine. What sand mine is you take two bars of Damascus, and you're putting in a homogeneous steel center. Right. So you have a three bar stack. And then you forge weld that, and then what it gives you is it gives you a homogeneous steel edge. So you have the edge holding that homogeneous steel, but you have the beauty of the Damascus. And depending on how you do it, it's really neat. Some of my patterns that I did back then, especially with the pure nickel Damascus, you get real bold when you etch. You get real bold patterns. Right. And I had a pattern where it actually looked like you took a bar of steel and dripped molten Damascus down on it. It was really cool looking. I like the look of the sand mine steel, and as well because you're mixing pure nickel. That pure nickel is going across the cutting edge. You'll have a good serrated, but the nickel, obviously, pure nickel is not going to wear very well. So it's for lack of better term, it's a steel sandwich. The sand, and it is more difficult to forge than. Sand mines exponentially. Like that's the next leap up from forging your own Damascus is I got into a lot of the and then I went with the art knives. I made a lot of. That's when I started getting into the folder making. So what year was that you kind of started out in the folders? The folders probably started around 90 to 91, right around that area. Right, and that's. So, I made the first knives. The first folders I made, of course, were slip joints. Right. They were the easiest to do, and that was the first ones that I made. And I got into making automatics, higher end automatics, and again pushing my skills further and further into the art knife realm of gold inlay, working with stone. Right. Ivory and natural materials. All that. G10 back then, I didn't have a piece of it in my shop.
Yeah,
it was all ivory and
carbon fiber was something in magazines, right?
Yeah. So and I did that probably 15 years. Into that type of knife.
That type of
And during that time, it was great. I was having a lot of fun, very artistically, challenging. But towards the end of that period in my knife making, I started yearning again for the using knife. Because a lot of those knives that I were making are going into collections, and I miss when I used to set up at the gun shows, and I had my skinning knives. Guys would come and they would buy the knife, and I would see them like the next year.
Right.
And they would be like, dude, I dressed out like 10 deer with this knife, and I never had to touch the edge. I mean, it was great. I'm going to hand this down to my grandkid, and it was, that feeling was just like, wow. I mean, you can't get any better honor being a craftsman than to have somebody use what you made and and be able to use it.
There's a certain amount of pride there in taking an object that has its intrinsic values and use, and seeing it out there and hearing that it's that it has been used and stuff. The art knives thing is kind of like making a great painting, where you're you can admire it for the craftsmanship that it took to make it, but there's a certain amount of tangible or something that you can feel about making a tool that somebody's going to go out there.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That was something that I kind of missed.
Right.
I was making a living, obviously, making art knives and stuff, but that was just something I kind of missed. I missed that that hard use.